Revenge with Karen.
I assume you'll be cleaning out your desk by noon? That was the first sentence Malcolm ever said to me. Not welcome, not thanks for keeping this place alive while we fumbled through the merger. Just that, like I was an old pizza box stinking up his new condo. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, nodded, and handed him the new hire handbook that I had written. He didn't notice the sarcasm. They never do. 16 years. 16. That's how long I'd been with Corvex Dynamics. I onboarded the first 3 sales reps, built the client scoring algorithm before AI was the buzzword of the month, and stitched together our internal workflow system using so much automation that we were scaling faster than our competitors without hiring a single extra coordinator. There wasn't a process in that building I hadn't touched: HR, finance, legal compliance. I didn't wear the crown, but I damn well built the castle. And here comes Malcolm with his fake tan and $600 belt, pretending the kingdom was his idea. The board brought him in after the merger with Ardent Tech, a move that was supposed to modernize Corvex's image. Translation: they wanted someone who looked good on panels, someone who said synergy without gagging. Malcolm could pitch, I'll give him that. He'd walk into a room, drop buzzwords like confetti, somehow leave people thinking he'd invented the wheel and the steering system. But behind the scenes, he was terrified of anything he couldn't control, which, unfortunately for him, was me. See, I never tried to climb the ladder. I was the ladder. People stepped on my work to look tall, and I let them because I thought that's what stability looked like. Until Malcolm started replacing my rungs with toddlers in suit jackets and TikTok degrees. I watched as he promoted a 27-year-old with a background in brand psychology to lead operations strategy. She spent her first week designing a new Slack emoji set. That same week, I got left off a critical product roadmap call, one that I had originally built. When I asked about it, Malcolm blinked at me like I'd interrupted his kombucha meditation. Brenda, we're trying to move fast now. Can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. I said nothing. I've learned it's better to let people hang themselves with their own rope. And boy, was he weaving a full-body harness. By the way, if you're still here, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and maybe toss us a like. 95% of you ghosts out there listen without subscribing. And hey, the team reads every single number like it's gospel. Seriously, it keeps this ship running smoother than our old CRM integrations. Anyway, Malcolm kept icing me out, but not all at once. First, it was smaller meetings, then project approvals. Then, suddenly, my name stopped showing up on executive summary emails. It was like watching a magician make your identity vanish, one shared Google Drive folder at a time. But here's the kicker. The systems they were now calling legacy and inflexible, yeah, those were mine, and not in the I helped with that kind of way. I designed them, scripted them, nursed them through every quarterly meltdown. It was the damn system. And when you fire the system, you better hope you backed up the operating manual. Spoiler alert, Malcolm didn't. The strategy team showed up on a Monday like a flock of consulting crows, tight blazers, fresh fades, and that MBA gleam in their eyes like they just discovered Excel. Malcolm introduced them with the kind of smug fanfare reserved for gender reveal parties and Ponzi schemes. These folks are here to streamline our infrastructure, announced like we'd all been asking for less function and more chaos. Their first order of business: gut the reporting architecture. The very system that kept our compliance filings on time, our forecasts accurate within 0.4%, and our executive dashboards from looking like an etch, a sketch mid-seizure. They called it clunky. I called it veteran software that had seen more war than half the sales team. Malcolm gave them carte blanche to explore optimization opportunities. Translation: break what works so it looks like you're fixing something. They started poking around my architecture like toddlers with power tools. I watched them disable a permissions filter that routed escalation alerts to legal before hitting ops. When I warned them it had tripped flags with our largest client, one of them, Ethan, or maybe it was Tyler, all had that smug espresso breath and Patagonia vest energy, waved me off with a chuckle. We've got eyes on it. This isn't 2011. That same week, a critical P4 escalation ticket from our medical tech client hit the wrong inbox and sat untouched for 36 hours. Result: the client's FDA timeline blew up. Their VP of regulatory called me, furious. I didn't say a word, just listened as he ranted about missed windows, broken trust, and how he was taking his $6.3 million contract under review. I apologized, even though the failure wasn't mine. I still had my pride, and I knew the real damage hadn't even begun. The next morning, Malcolm called a meeting. Small room, no coffee. Just vibes and blame. I need to know what happened, he said, flipping through the incident log like he even knew what he was reading. I started to explain, brief, professional, clear. He cut me off mid-sentence. We brought in new minds for a reason, Brenda. If the system can't handle forward momentum, maybe it's time to rethink who's maintaining it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't negligence. It was erasure, and he thought I'd go quietly, so I nodded, said nothing, and started collecting receipts. Every rollback I warned them against, every email where I flagged a dependency, every Slack ping I got ignored on. I screenshotted everything, loaded backups, archived logs, not out of vengeance but preservation. When the storm hit, and it would hit, I wanted the audit trail to lead right back to the idiots who thought duct taping a Tesla to a horse cart was strategic transformation. And then came the escalation meeting I wasn't invited to. It was for the same client, the one we nearly lost last week. They were on edge, and the call was meant to reassure them. But my invite magically lost. Oversight, he said, thought you were looped in. What happened instead was a slaughter. The new team promised integrations we didn't offer, fumbled a compliance question so badly the client asked if we were still ISO certified, and when pressed on delivery timelines, they cited data from a system we deprecated in 2019. The client hung up mid-call. I found out through an internal memo, and that CC'd the world and pointed a very limp finger at unmanaged legacy transitions. Guess whose name was the only one bolded? That's right, Brenda, the dinosaur, the scapegoat. Malcolm called me in, his voice syrupy but sharp. We're trying to move fast, Brenda. But if your systems keep breaking, we'll have to take a hard look at where the bottlenecks are. I stared at him. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, but my pulse pounded like a drum solo. No problem, I said. Just let me know where you'd like me to send the logs. He blinked. What logs? I smiled. The ones that show every modification your team made since the audit started. He didn't respond. Just cleared his throat and dismissed me with that stupid half nod like he'd won something. But here's the thing about being invisible for 16 years. When you finally move, no one sees it coming. The invite came through on a Thursday afternoon. Subject line, quick sync performance alignment. No body text, no attachments. Just a calendar placeholder sent by Malcolm's assistant, who spelled my name wrong for the third time that month. I already knew what it was. You don't work 16 years in a place without learning the scent of a trap. It's a mix of cologne, coffee breath, and the faint stench of decision papers printed before you walk in. Still, I showed up on time. The conference room was too bright, lights buzzing like they had a secret. Malcolm sat at the head of the table, his overpriced loafers kicked out like a teenager trying to dominate a poker game he didn't understand. HR was there too, Melissa, young, nervous, chewing her pen cap like it was the last thing keeping her alive. Brenda, Malcolm said with that fake silk smile. Thanks for making time. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. I just waited. Because when someone tells you they're realigning a company, usually about to align your backside with the parking lot, he motioned for me to take a seat anyway. I did, slowly, calm. We've been doing some deep thinking, he started, looking at where the company is headed, the kind of agility we need. And he paused like he was waiting for me to beg. I didn't. We've realized we need builders, people who can keep up. He said it like I'd been dragging the company through molasses for fun, like the systems I designed hadn't been holding the place together through 3 executive transitions, 2 lawsuits, and a merger that nearly tanked our vendor contracts. I tilted my head. Builders? Malcolm nodded. Yeah, folks who can be iterative, who understand that legacy doesn't always mean strength. I looked at Melissa. She winced slightly, then looked down at her hands. She knew. Everyone knew. Then Malcolm leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was about to announce who won The Bachelor. So we're going to restructure your role, effective immediately. He slid a folder across the table. Severance package, NDA, standard corporate exile paperwork, padded with enough legal fluff to make it look like a promotion. We appreciate your contributions, he added. Truly, this just isn't a fit anymore. He waited for the reaction. Anger, tears, denial. It's how these people get off. Want you to fall apart so they can walk away thinking they were the strong ones. I didn't give him that. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and stared at him. Just stared. That's when he shifted in his chair, fidgeted with his Mont Blanc pen like it had answers. You have nothing to say? He asked. I shrugged. You made your decision. He nodded slowly. That's your final decision? I stood. picked up my badge, peeled it off the lanyard like it was diseased. Let's see how it stands without its foundation. I set the badge on the table, walked to the door, paused. You might want to check your sandbox environment, I said. Your new strategy team just deleted 3 dependencies without realizing they looped into payroll. Malcolm blinked. Melissa dropped her pen. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out, heels clicking down the hallway like a slow drumbeat at a funeral. 16 years, no fanfare, no handshake, just the sterile silence of a room that thought it had won something. But here's the thing about foundations. They don't crumble when they're ignored. They wait, they watch. And when they're gone, everything above starts to crack. The first thing I did after walking out of Corvex wasn't cry or scream or pour a whiskey the size of Ohio. I unplugged. Literally. Work phone powered down. Personal laptop with sandbox access, wiped and stored. Slack, logged out. LinkedIn, muted. Every tether they'd gotten used to yanking, I cut clean. But before I vanished, I did one last thing. I sent 32 emails, not to coworkers, not to Malcolm, to vendors, to back-end support partners, to 2 legal contacts I'd kept on speed dial since the rogue CTO debacle in 2017. Just a simple, professional note. Per termination of contract, please be advised I am no longer the point of contact for Corvex Dynamics, effective immediately. Kindly redirect all technical communications to your internal liaison or designated replacement. No anger, no threats, just pure protocol, cold as a dental tray. And then, I disappeared. By Monday, they were already bleeding. A renewal key for the licensing suite didn't go through. The third-party authentication server flagged an outdated domain because Ethan, strategy guru, emoji specialist, know you had to update the TLS handshake on the secondary API. HR's payroll export triggered a recursive loop in the automation script and spat out a CSV file with negative values for executive bonuses. The finance director nearly swallowed her Invisalign. But the crown jewel, the quarterly performance report for Axiom Medical, their biggest client, it vanished. Not got deleted, vanished. Gone. Like a ghost in a locked room. Dashboard still pulled data, but the summary analysis module, the one that flagged regulatory risks and suggested proactive budget shifts, just showed a blinking cursor and a 404. That report was my baby. I'd hard-coded the logic after Axiom threatened to walk 3 years ago over delayed responses. No one else even knew the full architecture. And no, it wasn't documented. Not because I was sloppy, because when you're constantly being pushed out of rooms you built, you learn to make sure those doors only reopen from your side. Inside Corvex, chaos bloomed like black mold under fresh paint. They couldn't find the admin credentials for the analytics dashboard. Those lived in a private password vault that Malcolm had never approved budget for. The vendor account tied to our uptime monitor started throwing alerts because it had been routed through a burner Gmail address I controlled, temporarily, because legal once forgot to register our official email domain during a migration. The dominoes fell one by one, each labeled legacy in bright neon, until they realized legacy meant literally everything keeping us from being sued. And through it all, I didn't say a word. They tried fixing things on their own. Ethan declared he'd build a lightweight interim framework in Notion. Lasted 3 hours before it overwrote a finance sandbox. One of the younger devs tried reverse engineering my scripts, but couldn't figure out why half the triggers were timed to avoid a load balancer bug from 2019. I was gone, but my fingerprint was everywhere, and not in some malicious, vengeful way. This wasn't sabotage. This was architecture. See, Malcolm thought he could cut out the blueprint and just keep the building, that the pipes would pump water and the lights would flicker on because they always had. But he never asked how, because asking how meant admitting you didn't know, and men like Malcolm don't do that. By Friday, I got a LinkedIn message from a senior dev I'd mentored years ago. All it said was, "Did you mean for the reporting cluster to go offline right after you left?" Because it did, and nobody knows why. I didn't reply. Just stared at the screen for a second, closed the app, let them flail. Let them crawl through the skeleton of the house I built, looking for light switches that don't exist. Let them reboot and patch and power point their way through meetings while the board grows nervous and clients start to ask questions. I didn't take anything with me. No code, no files. I just took myself. Turns out that was the glue. By the second week, the tech floor sounded like a haunted call center. Phones ringing, keyboards slamming, 2 project managers crying, one of them openly. The new strategy team had stopped pretending they knew what they were doing. Their whiteboards were filled with crossed-out acronyms, frantic arrows, and one deeply cursed phrase written in red marker: reverse engineer Brenda's logic. Good luck with that. The client dashboards were still mostly intact visually, but the underlying structure, broken. The automations had collapsed like bad scaffolding. Fallback scripts were triggering fail-safes I never told anyone existed, mainly because they were never supposed to be touched. When the system lost contact with a deprecated compliance server I'd built as a patch during the 2020 crisis, it reflagged every transaction from the last 6 months as unverified. That got one of our top-tier healthcare clients flagged for internal audit, which is how Malcolm ended up on a call with their legal team. I wasn't there, obviously, but I knew exactly how it went. I could picture it. Him sitting in the big glass conference room, jaw tight, scrolling through an email thread with phrases like contractual obligation, regulatory failure, and considering termination of agreement. The client had been with Corvex for nearly a decade. They'd grown under our infrastructure, trusted our compliance templates, even bragged at conferences about how plugged in their data flow was. Now they were on the verge of pulling a multi-million-dollar deal because someone forgot to reassign a data certificate I'd been personally overseeing for years. And Malcolm, he was just now realizing that the legacy systems he dismantled weren't archaic, they were custom-tailored. They didn't follow tech trends, they followed client behaviors. Patterns I'd studied, mapped, and hard-coded into the bones of our infrastructure. IT was underwater. 2 of the sysadmins quit and left a note on his whiteboard. You can't fix a brain with duct tape. Their replacements were contractors who couldn't even find the version control archive. Meanwhile, the new operations lead, a guy Malcolm hired straight from a logistics startup that made smoothie delivery apps, suggested switching to a low-code solution to rebuild the backend. The devs looked at him like he'd suggested curing cancer with a Pinterest board. Malcolm's daily briefings turned into hourly stand-ups. He barked at people, cut budgets in panic, reassigned ownership of workflows no one understood. His meetings bled past dinner and into weekends. People stopped making eye contact in the hallways, and then, quietly, I got an email. It was from legal, not the usual HR fluff or a desperate IT manager. This was top brass. Subject: potential short-term advisory agreement. Body: Dear Miss Reynolds, hope you're doing well. We were wondering if you might be open to discussing a limited engagement to assist with certain system transitions currently underway. Please let us know if you'd be available for preliminary conversation. Of course, this would be structured to your terms. Polite, measured, the digital equivalent of sending a peace offering taped to a white flag. I read it 3 times, didn't reply. Not because I was angry, not because I needed revenge, because silence was louder. See, you don't need to raise your voice when your absence does the talking. I knew what that email meant. They'd finally admitted the systems weren't failing because I left. They were failing because I had been the only one keeping them upright in the first place. I left the email sitting unread, starred but unopened. A few days later, I got another. This time from someone I hadn't heard from in months, chair of the audit committee. Short, 1 sentence. You spare 30 minutes this week to discuss operational gaps. I smiled. The power wasn't shifting, it had already shifted. They just didn't realize it yet. The quarterly board call was supposed to be routine. 5 slides, a few rosy charts, some half-truths about exciting pivots and record engagement. Malcolm even wore his navy blazer instead of his usual blazer with sneakers combo, his attempt at gravitas. It derailed by slide 3. Board member from Boston, retired Navy, ran 3 turnarounds in biotech, cut in mid-pitch. Why are renewals down 17% quarter over quarter? Malcolm blinked. The transition phase created some frictions. New systems are still stabilizing. Another board member, old school oil and gas money, leaned forward. Your net promoter score dropped 26 points in 2 weeks. That's not friction. That's a hemorrhage. And then the kicker came from the audit woman who once grilled a CFO so hard he quit mid-flight. Why is it that every client complaint in the last 30 days references broken automation, missed escalations, or unfulfilled reporting cycles? The room went quiet. Even the assistant who'd been fake typing on their laptop stopped tapping. Malcolm cleared his throat. We're investigating the dependencies. The prior workflows were heavily centralized and undocumented. That was the wrong sentence. Audit chair raised an eyebrow. Undocumented? You mean proprietary knowledge held by a single employee? Malcolm flinched. That's being addressed. Another board member, the only one who ever remembered my name in meetings, slid a printed report across the table. We conducted an internal audit of system roles and performance logs. Brenda Reynolds was executing responsibilities across 3 departments. She had top-tier credentials in operations, compliance, vendor management without ever holding those official titles. Someone muttered de facto COO, and just like that, the room shifted. Malcolm tried to spin it, talked about agile evolution, new leadership pipelines, the need to flatten hierarchies to foster innovation. The audit chair cut him off. You fired your operations spine and expected the body to stand. Silence. The directive was blunt. Fix this, said the Boston board member, or face governance review. Malcolm looked like someone had unplugged his confidence. He left the meeting pale and quiet, then spent the next hour in his office, alone, staring at his screen like it owed him a lifeline. That evening, I received another email from Malcolm. Subject: Operational Support Opportunity CC, Board Chair, Audit Chair, Legal. Brenda, I hope this note finds you well. Given recent challenges, I'd like to explore the possibility of engaging your services on a consulting basis. Your institutional knowledge is, of course, deeply respected. The board has expressed interest in your terms for potential re-engagement. He didn't even try to hide the desperation. It was the first time he'd used my full name since the day I was fired. But I didn't reply. Not yet. I poured a glass of wine, sat on my porch, watched the sky dim into that bruised pink you only get on Midwestern evenings. They were panicking now. And I was exactly where I wanted to be. Because vindication isn't loud. It doesn't gloat. It doesn't storm back into the building with a trumpet. It waits. And when the doors finally reopen, it walks in slow, calm, holding the invoice. The meeting was held at a neutral site, one of those minimalist hotel lounges with too much glass and not enough soul, kind of place executives pick when they want it to feel like a power negotiation, but can't afford the vulnerability of home turf. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat at a corner table, facing the entrance, black folder resting on my lap like a sealed verdict. Malcolm showed up exactly on time. Not a second late, not a second early. The man was still clinging to image like it could save him. HR trailed behind him, Melissa again, this time with tighter lips and a leather binder that looked heavier than her spine. He gave me a smile that tried too hard. Brenda, he said, extending his hand. I didn't shake it. We sat. He launched into his pitch like a man trying to sell sand to the desert. The company's in a place of recalibration, he said. There's been recognition at the board level of certain oversights. Institutional gaps. We believe your experience positions you uniquely to assist in stabilizing the operational landscape during this transitional window. I waited, no nod, no smile, just silence sharpened to a knife's edge. Finally, I spoke, calm, even I'm not coming back as an employee. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. I slid the folder across the table. Melissa reached for it like it might explode. She opened it, eyes scanning, her pupils dilated. Malcolm leaned in, read. His face didn't twitch, but I saw the flicker. That involuntary tick when a man realizes he just walked into a room with no exits. My proposal was clean. I would return under a 6-month consultancy. No subordination to Malcolm. I'd report directly to the board. My hourly rate would be 3 times what I'd made previously. I'd set my own schedule, work remote if I chose, retain final sign-off authority on any process rebuilds I touched. Also included, a clause forbidding any internal staff from modifying my work without written consent. I wasn't going to be their crutch. I'd be their contract, a vault with legs. Malcolm tried to smile. These numbers are ambitious. I finally looked him in the eyes. So was firing the person who ran your company? He sat back, exhaled through his nose like he was holding in a monologue that no longer mattered. Then came the sound that sealed it all, the scrape of a chair behind me. The board rep had arrived. An older man, quiet, surgical in tone. He'd been listening the whole time from a nearby table. He stepped forward, nodded once at me, then addressed Malcolm without pleasantries. We've reviewed her terms. They're acceptable. Malcolm looked like he'd swallowed a burning coin, stammered something about aligning on expectations, maybe revisiting the scope. The board rep cut him off. She's not requesting, she's offering. And considering our current situation, we're not in a position to negotiate. Melissa's pen hovered over a printed agreement. Her hands shook slightly. Malcolm didn't say another word, not for the rest of the meeting. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just gathered the folder, tucked it back into my bag, and stood. "Send me the access credentials by end of day," I said. Then I walked out, heels clicking against tile, the sound of regained leverage echoing off the cold hotel glass. No shouting, no revenge speech. Just a single, undeniable fact: he wasn't in control anymore. And I'd made that clear without even raising my voice. I didn't take an office. That was the first rule. They offered me the corner suite, the one with the absurd glass wall and the fake succulent on the desk. The last two heads of operations had gone to suffocate in style. I declined. Politely. Instead, I worked from a small laptop in the breakroom-turned consulting space 2 floors down. One window, no art, no nameplate, just peace. They brought me a keycard. I never used it. I had back-end access. Why would I need a door? The first thing I did was log into the vendor dashboard and kill the auto-renewal panic flag. Licensing had tripped a cascade failure that left half the client services team working off outdated sandbox reports. I re-established 2 vendor handshakes in under 10 minutes. One required a 2-factor auth code from an old burner phone I still had in a drawer. Malcolm's team didn't even know the burner existed. They thought it was an internal firewall issue. It wasn't. It was just me gone. I sent no announcements. No all-staff email, no LinkedIn post about returning to Roots or new chapters. I simply showed up in the logs. The day I restored the compliance scripts for our international client portal, our most high-maintenance European contract stopped threatening to pull out. They hadn't responded to Malcolm's team in a week. My first email, short, technical, accurate, got a reply in 8 minutes with the subject line: "Finally, someone who speaks our language." It wasn't about ego. It was about fluency. They trusted me because I never sold them promises, just delivered results. 3 days in, someone from finance passed me in the hallway and whispered, "It feels like the lights came back on." I smiled, said nothing. But I noticed the change. Team leads started adding me back to project folders. Junior devs sent Slack messages with questions prefaced by, "Sorry, I know you're not technically back, but in Malcolm, he vanished." Not literally. I wouldn't have blamed him. He just stopped showing up on my radar. No emails, no drop-ins. He rerouted all consultant communications through HR and started taking meetings in his car. I walked past him once in the parking garage. He turned his face like the sun hurt. He never once looked me in the eye again. One afternoon, I pulled up the back-end admin panel, the one tied to critical override functions, vendor escalations, port retraction locks, emergency credential resets. I clicked through the approval list. Malcolm's name was still listed as a root user. That wouldn't do. I opened the permission tree, scrolled to his profile, and clicked Remove Access. No alert went out. No confirmation message. Just a small green check mark. Quiet. Efficient. Like a lever being reset to its rightful place. He wouldn't even know until the next crisis hit, and by then, no one would ask him to solve it anyway. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it because he was no longer part of the solution. Never had been. By the end of the second week, the system was humming again, not because I rebuilt it from scratch. I didn't have to. It was mine to begin with. I just plugged the arteries back into the heart and let it beat. The company looked steadier. People walked straighter. Panic had turned into productivity, but I didn't smile for them. I smiled for me, because this wasn't about saving Corvex. It was about proving that the architect never needed the building needed the architect. And now that I was back, I wasn't rebuilding for applause. I was rebuilding for legacy. The leadership meeting wasn't on the official calendar. No agenda, no pre-reads, just a cryptic invite from the board with the subject line transition planning. Half the exec team thought it was about rolling out the new procurement software. The smarter half showed up early and silent. I walked in exactly on time. Not early, not late. They were already seated, Malcolm in his usual chair, tight-lipped and sweating through his blazer, trying to pretend he still ran the room. The audit chair sat directly across from him, arms folded. Calm, surgical. She'd already read the final act and was just waiting for the curtain to drop. No one made small talk. The board's outside legal counsel logged in via video. The rest of the board was already in the room. There was no introduction, no coffee. The chair cleared his throat. "We're initiating a leadership restructuring." Just like that, no fluff, no metaphors. Malcolm flinched. What? Restructuring in what capacity? The chair continued, voice flat as asphalt. "Effective end of business today, you'll be stepping down to pursue other ventures. We've prepared transition language for the press." Malcolm opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Silence followed, heavy, like a courtroom right after the sentence is read but before anyone breathes. Then the chair turned to me. "Brenda," he said, and this time he said it with intention. Like the name meant something. "Would you consider a transitional leadership role while we stabilize?" Everyone turned. Even Malcolm. His eyes wide now, not pleading, just stunned. Like a man watching a door slam shut that he didn't realize was ever open. I didn't respond right away. Just calmly closed my laptop. One hand, smooth motion. The sound echoed in the stillness like a gavel. I looked him square in the face. The same face that had smiled when he handed me a severance folder disguised as a performance review. Same face that thought erasing me would be as easy as deleting a name from an org chart. And I said, "You already had your decision." A pause. "Now here's mine." I stood. No anger, no gloating. Just that precise, clean silence I'd carried with me from the moment I walked out. The board didn't say a word. Malcolm leaned forward like he wanted to object, but couldn't find footing. He looked around, searching for someone to validate him. The faces were neutral, professional, but no longer on his side. I turned to the chair. "I'll provide transitional support for the next 6 weeks. After that, the company needs to decide if it wants builders or politicians." He nodded once, no argument. On the way out, I passed the whiteboard still filled with Ethan's chicken scratch diagrams and post-it notes. One of them said ownership, with a question mark underlined twice. I smiled at that, because in the end, I never took back control. I just reminded them who had it all along. No vengeance. No sabotage. I didn't crash the system. I walked away from it, and it collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. And when they begged me to return, I didn't come back as an employee. I came back as the one with the keys, not because I needed the company, but because the company had finally remembered it needed me. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.